Good afternoon. I'm Kurt Callahan. I'm with Callahan Consulting Associates, and I am working on behalf of the Watertown Oswego SBDC. The topic today is an introduction to hazardous communication. Basically, your right to know program, also known as HAZCOM. Usually a very exciting class. There's a lot of sarcasm in that statement because most people do not want to talk about it, do not want to think about it, don't want to deal with it until something goes terribly wrong. And then it becomes a very expensive situation. This is the purpose. I'm trying to give small business owners and small business managers enough information to chew on that they know which direction or what questions to ask. So we can start off with, why is HAZCOM important to you? How do the systems interrelate within the HAZCOM program? Right to know, safety data sheets, SDS programs, global harmonization is also referred to. 6 steps to an effective program, the effective system, and what sources are out there to help you, especially from the small business side. Okay, why is HAZCOM important to you? Well, the first step of everything that we talk about is to protect your employees and yourself, to protect your island, your people. Hazard awareness. And you'll be surprised at some of the hazards of day-to-day products that you're commonly using in your home and everywhere else, that when you start to bring in other people because of their conditions or their sensitivities, suddenly it goes from being a normal product that has absolutely no issue to, hey, how come that guy is having difficulty breathing? So knowing what you're using and reading through the data sheets before you start using them in the circumstances that you're using them at becomes very important. Exposure emergency actions. The wrong time to try to figure out what you can do to help somebody who's been exposed to something, accidentally drinking a product, getting it in their eyes, is when they're already screaming. That is not the time to try to figure it out because everybody's already adrenalized. Everybody else is screaming, running around with their hair on fire. So having these precautions understood before you start using a product becomes very important. Cost. Environmental incidents become expensive very fast. A very simple use of common product like Simple Green. If you have an oil water separator in your system and that oil water separator pushes the wastewater to the water treatment plant, that Simple Green is known to kill all the good bacteria that makes the bad bacteria go away. When they trace it back to you, that could become very expensive to you. That's why knowing how to dispose of your products after you use them becomes very important. Efficiency. Good HAZCOM program, much like we talked about during our introduction to safety, can assist, especially a small business, become more efficient and get what you need only, rather than what you need plus what everybody else thinks you need plus what you want to keep in a closet someplace. You can save yourself a good deal of money by having an authorized list and making sure an authorized inventory for each container is abided to. And you can limit your waste also, because a lot of times when you buy in bulk and you have stuff sitting in a supply room someplace, either it reaches shelf life or it gets damaged because of the forklift guy or because you have a flood or whatever. Having the right amount of products, or the products that you've authorized only, becomes very important to limiting your waste and limiting your dollars as they flow out the sewer of your business. Cradle to grave. You are responsible for a hazardous material the moment you use it until it is gone forever. So if you pay somebody under the table to get rid of your haz waste and they're dumping it in your local lake and they get caught, it could come back to haunt you as well. Okay. OSHA compliance standard. There's the OSHA compliance standard up top. If you've been through a couple of these classes so far, you've seen the reference to the 1910, which is the general industry standard. And it basically lays the foundation for all employers to make sure that their employees understand what chemicals they're using in their area and give them the education and knowledge to refer back to as they use them, and how they dispose of them, what to do in emergency circumstances. That would be the general clause that they will refer to when they start writing you up, if they do find these problems. Let's talk about costs. I mean, ultimately, every small business owner is sitting there trying to figure out how to keep a good margin, how to pay their employees, and how to stay open. That's the challenge, especially in the recent few months. Uncontrolled inventory. What does that mean? If every mechanic gets to go to the supply person and says, "Hey, I want you to buy this for me. I want you to buy that for me," you start having a bunch of stuff that may have gotten 2 squirts used, and it's sitting there. And oh, by the way, that stuff that they bought is packaged by several different people, much like Chevy, Ford, Dodge. Everybody has their preference, but as a business, it will save you waste. It'll save you accumulation of products that you don't need around if you just settle down, have a meeting. All right, everybody, WD-40 or Napa penetrator, what do we want to use? Because we're only going to use one. We're only going to buy one product. We're going to have that one product in the storeroom. So you are able to control the inventory. So rather than it becoming a personal preference thing, you have that inventory. By knowing what your inventory is, that will feed into your safety data sheet program and a couple other programs. But controlling that inventory significantly lowers your waste, significantly controls a lot of cost. Lost time. When you lose an employee, you lose them. Okay. Most people cannot replace an employee immediately. There's training involved. There's learning how we do things. So if an employee accidentally ingests a product and they have to take a week out because that's how long it's going to take to get that product out of their system and bring them back up to healthy, that's a lost employee. Fines. I will tell you this straight up. OSHA can fine you. And when I say OSHA, it can be federal OSHA, state OSHA. Then the EPA can come in. They can fine you, federal and state. And then even the DEC in some cases can roll in and fine you. So that's 3 different agencies that can come in at 3 different times and fine you for doing things incorrectly when it comes to your hazardous waste and your hazardous communication programs. And then after they fine you, you have to pay for the cleanup. Okay, so again, like I said, you're paying your brother-in-law under the table to take those 50-gallon drums of oil and antifreeze and get them out of your business because you're not supposed to store them there. He drives it half a mile down the road and kicks it off the trailer on a secondary dirt road and eventually gets caught. You are still on the blame line for that cleanup. So it is very good policy to have a real plan in place. Here's another stat. Illnesses, industries due to exposures. We as a community have gotten better at understanding this. More people understand that it's not okay to roll around in products that we use or to leave products on our hands, on our feet. We're getting better at it. How's the whole system work? All right, well, it starts with your manufacturers and your importers. Anybody you get a product from, okay, make sure that your logistical folks or your supply folks understand this. If they go and they pick up chemicals from everybody, they should be asking for the safety data sheet from that manufacturer, okay? They are required to give you the SDS, the safety data sheet, for the products they are providing you. Many of them will also give you secondary labels. So if you get a 50-gallon drum and it's filled with solution X, they will give you little stickers for secondary containers for solution X, because you're obviously not going to use a 50-gallon drum. You're going to squirt it into a squirt bottle. Then that squirt bottle, because it now has the product, has to have the labeling as well. So a lot of times your chemical manufacturers, your importers, your distributors becomes the first step of reminding you of your program. They can also help you cost-wise, especially if they provide you secondary labels and stuff like that. They can help you reduce cost on being compliant. Then it's up to the employer to implement the program. All the containers you get, all the products you get should be labeled. They should come with a safety data sheet. They should have the warning pictographs on them. I know working outside of the US, there are a lot of products that people get locally that come from a guy's garage. We can't do that here in this country. If you get a product, you have to be able to show what the product is, what's in the product. All employers must have a written program. If you have to explain a program to an inspector, you're already losing. Your first step should be to open a book, open a website, something that all your employees have access to explain what your hazard program is. That starts with the list of hazardous chemicals in the workplace. Okay, that is the building block of everything. Once you know what you have on site, what you, the owner or the CEO, are authorizing to be on site, that begins your program. That helps you develop what you have to train your employees in. You have to make sure that all the containers are labeled. I've already used one explanation. You go from a 50-gallon drum to a squirt bottle. As soon as you start putting the product into the squirt bottle, there has to be a label on it explaining what the product is in there. A very good technique is to also have the tab or the location of the SDS on that label. So if product X is tab A12, you can have product X's name on there, A12. That tells the employee immediately they go to tab A12 and they're going to see the safety data sheet. Or more importantly, when the employee is passed out in the middle of the floor, the person who finds them can look at the bottle and know to go to page A12 or tab A12 and find the safety data sheet. But that's also assuming you have all the safety data sheets for your products, your chemicals. Again, first stop should be whoever sells it to you. Whoever sells it to you is required to provide you with an SDS. So ask for it. If you look through the regulations, you can find where it says in the regulation that if you're a sole proprietorship, you don't have to do this. And that is the letter of the law. So let's say you're a leather tanner. You work out of your home business and everybody brings carcasses to you and you tan the leather or you prepare the stuff. And whatever chemicals you're using to do that, you've been using them for years and years and years and years. And then when you're done, you go out back and you throw it out in the lawn. And then someone sees you doing that. And it turns out that chemical going into the water table is a problem. And now that problem, even though you're not required to have a program, you are required to know about what the hazards and the disposal of that product are. So that nothing issue and that system that you didn't have to have suddenly becomes a real costly event. So be very cautious about avoiding it. If you're a sole proprietorship, you should be able to create your safety data library, your inventory very quickly, very easily, one book, and having it available so that if someone does show up to pick up their item and they bring their granddaughter and the granddaughter goes over to a Gatorade bottle that you're using to use as a secondary container and takes a swig, at least you know immediately what the hazards of that product are. You can start the initial first aid, and then when the emergency folks get there, you could tell them exactly by giving them a copy of the SDS if necessary, what that kid has ingested, and protect them and protect yourself. So long-winded version of it's a painful, nobody likes to think about it, but it is a fairly simple system to get up and running to protect yourself. Your workers have to be trained on the programs, the elements, the hazards, protective measures. Are you providing the correct PPE, personal protective equipment. Making sure that your workers understand once you're done with the product, this is how we dispose of it, or this is the container we return it to. Okay. Keeping the information up to date, keeping everybody doing what's right becomes the important ankle biters. You're right to know about hazardous chemicals. The employer is required to have a written and complete hazard communication program that includes information on how do we label our containers. Okay, what do the pictograms mean? How do we use them? When we break it down to a secondary container, how do we label that secondary container? What is acceptable for this workplace? Your safety data sheets, they used to be referred to as MSDSs. Now they're referred to as SDSs, safety data sheets. You should have them on file, and they should be updated accordingly. You should have someone who periodically is double checking. Again, one of the nice techniques is whoever your person is who's bringing in supplies or putting them in the supply room, they're reaching out to the vendors saying, hey, we get product X from you all the time. The date I have on the SDS says 2018. Is there a more current one? And then you just got to replace the SDS. And then your worker training. Training must include physical and health hazards of the chemicals, how workers can protect themselves. It also reminds employees if their health condition changes. A simple thing like becoming pregnant now becomes important for that employee to go back and say, okay, these are the things we use every day. How many of them should I avoid now? Is there a warning in the SDS? Should I be wearing rubber gloves now instead of just using it with my hands and then washing it at the end of the day? Should I be breathing these vapors? The same thing applies to anything else, cold weather induced asthma or any of those other things. Any medical condition, change of status, and also if you have a family member, it makes the employee realize, look, I need to change clothes before I go home because I don't want to bring this product's residue back because grandma has this or that, the other thing. All of these things roll into becoming your right to know program. So whether it's referred to as the HazCom program or the right to know program, these are the basics that keeps you out of hot water. This is just the basic headings of an SDS. I'm not going to go through all of them in detail because it's something we would do more as we sit down and start teaching your folks. But the first one is identification. Identifier that you're going to use on the label, the description. It will have the name, the address, the phone number of the people. That comes in handy when you're looking to update stuff, or if you have a question. Hey, when we mix this with hydraulic fluid, it seems to do this. And those are the people who can drill down and explain, well, this can't be used with hydraulic fluid if you look at the other sections. The second heading, the hazard identification. It will tell you, is it a corrosive? Is it a flammable? Is it explosive? It'll give you pictographs. That right off the bat starts the thought process of where you store it, how you use it. It'll then break down the composition and the ingredients to make sure that you know what's within the product. So rather than calling it WD-40, it'll actually tell you what is in a WD-40. First aid measures, very important for the average employee and the people around them. Someone gets it on their skin, somebody gets it in their eyes, wrong time to try to figure it out. And the most common answer is, get me water, let's flush it out. There are a lot of products that do not react well to water. So if you throw the water on, you just made things worse. So before you use any product, before any employee uses any product, they should read up on it first. That's the whole purpose of the SDS. That's your pre-work program. Firefighting measures, especially if you're in close with your firefighters, your local volunteers or whatever, have them come through once in a while. let them look through your SDS book. Let them look through your storage locker so they know what types of products are being stored where. So if they know they have to fight a fire from the front and the back is where your storage shed is, they may want to start watering that down early to keep anything getting to those flammables. Accidental release. If it spills, what personal protection do you need? What protective equipment? How do you contain the spill? If the spill gets into a water table or a water source, who do you have to call? All these things become important, not while it's happening, but beforehand. You need to know about it beforehand because it also taps into how do you get rid of it? How do you dispose of it? Handling and storage, it'll tell you, can you transport in a closed container? Is there a heat? Is there a cold threshold? Nothing like spending $10,000 on cleaning supplies. Someone leaves them in the outdoor shed here in North Country, and they freeze, and then you find out that the chemicals no longer work once they're frozen. Better to know that beforehand. Exposure controls, PPE, that's another place where they're going to tell you how long you can work with a product before you have to have a respirator. How long can it be, sitting in a workspace with no ventilation? What constitutes proper ventilation? Those will be determined there in Section 8. Physical and chemical properties. This is where they break it down to the science geek level, and they give you everything that someone's going to ask you. Okay, that's why these sheets actually can speak on your behalf a lot better than you can. At least for me. I'm not a scientist. My brother is a scientist. But these physical and chemical properties mean something to other people whose job it is to know this. So when you have the SDS, like a doctor at an ER, if you're able to bring the SDS with you, it tells them exactly what the product is and what's in it so they can figure things out. Stability, reactivity. I said this a little time ago. Nothing like getting a new product, storing it in a place that's known to flood, and then finding that it explodes or it causes fire when it gets wet. You should know that beforehand. But it'll tell you all the stability and reactivity. It'll kind of re-emphasize the storage restrictions and tell you how it reacts. Toxicology. It'll tell you the routes of exposure. It gets in through the respiratory, or it gets in through oral intake or eyes. All those things it'll be talking about. How does it affect the environment? This is where it's going to tell you if you release it into the water table, you have to immediately notify local authorities, stuff like that. I think I talked about a little while ago, products that go in water separators or get pushed back to the water treatment plant, you have to be very careful with. Stuff that you use to wash your car and wash your stuff at the house will shut down a water treatment plant when you use them. So that's where that's going to be in there. Disposal considerations. This will tell you what's required to dispose of your waste. So once you use a cleaner on your floors, you got the floors all nice and shiny, you got these big buckets of residue, you can't just dump them down the drain, or you can't just dump them outside by the river. It'll tell you what you have to do to properly dispose of it and avoid getting you in trouble. Transportation, we talked about this before. This gets into the very focused DOT portion where it'll tell you how you have to placard them, what you have to do to make sure that they don't spill for any reason, all that stuff. 15 is non-mandatory, but they will tell you any regulations specific to the product, so that if somebody starts blurping out that it's a violation of regulation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you might actually find the regulation that applies to this product already in the SDS. And then the date of the preparation of the SDS or the last change to it, there'll be other information in there saying expect a new SDS on this date. That will help you keep your stuff up to date, and it'll let you know that it was updated on the dates that'll be in there. All right, So far we talked about a bunch of compliance and regulatory stuff, and it comes down to the frustration of the owner going, hey, what I want to know is how do I start one? All right. So the first thing we do, we learn the standards, we identify responsible staff. Reading through the OSHA standards, I don't recommend it for nighttime reading. It's not easy to read. That's probably one of the areas you should look out to a person like me, or call your local OSHA office, or if you know any of the environmental people, hey, can you help step me through this? Um, be familiar with the provisions. Be familiar with your field techs. The field people around here aren't against helping you when you ask for it. If they show up and start inspecting you, or if you've had a spill or you've released into the water table, that will not be the time to ask them for help, because that would be in the too late category. So reaching out to these people is usually a positive experience. Hey, this is what I'm doing. This is what I've been told. I just want to make sure I'm in compliance. Okay. Um, Having somebody responsible for your HazCom program, like we spoke about safety, like we talked about a couple other things so far, having a person whose ownership of the program is theirs becomes important. You, the owner, aren't going to keep up with it. The person who gets your supplies, good start. The person who is always going back to where you dump your used oil into containers might be another person that will be a good person to put on the line of, hey, can you kind of own this and help us maintain it? And then, identify other people for training, or for, quarterly walkthroughs or something like that. Then you sit down and you implement a written hazardous program. This goes back into standard operating procedures, having something written down. And that's another thing you can get help with, both from me or from other people. That 10 to 1 says you're not the first auto parts store, you're not the first hair and nail salon. There are already written programs out there that we can just adapt to what you have. Prepare a written plan, how your hazardous communication is addressed in your facility. This is where you start to prepare that list of, these are the products authorized to be here. Okay. These are what we use here. Employees will not bring in their own products. Okay. And then that inventory list starts turning into your authorized list, which also is mirrored by your safety data sheet programs. And you start to know exactly what you're using, how you dispose of it, and how much you're allowed to have on hand. And part of the inventory list becomes the authorized list. How much of the product is needed weekly, monthly? How much will you store in the bulk storage room versus the little yellow cabinets out on the mechanics floors? How much you need weekly, monthly, annually becomes a great cost saver. Instead of buying 16 cases of WD-40, you can limit it to 1 case a month, because that's really all we use. And we really don't want to keep storing that 16 cases, because it ends up having a 3% loss rate or 10% loss rate. Ensure containers are labeled. Everything that you're given from a vendor should be properly labeled. The containers, like if you get a big box, the containers within should already be labeled. When you start breaking them down into secondary containers, that's when it becomes your responsibility to make sure you can keep the labeling going. Keep the labels on shipped containers. Don't tear them off. Don't spray paint over them because you don't like the guy. Leave those labels on there. Label the workplace containers. That's talking about your smaller, your secondary containers. You have to have those labeled. Maintain your safety data sheet library. Again, every vendor that sells you something is required to give it to you when you ask for it. So if you can't find a safety data sheet for one of your products, your first stop is the guy who took your money. Hey, we just bought a case of this. We can't find an SDS. We need you to get us an SDS. And their answer should be, give me an email. I'll get it to you this afternoon. Okay. If their answer is, that's your problem, well, That's not accordance with the law, so we got a problem. Every item on your inventory should have an SDS in your library. Inform and train employees, okay? Show them what hazardous materials you're working with. That also should be part of their certification and training program for the job they're doing. Include the standards. You know, this is why we don't throw these down the drain. This is why we collect the residues in this location in our satellite accumulation point. And all employees need to be trained prior to starting work. Okay, it's not something to ease into while that person is out there working in your garage for a week and a half. All these things should be done beforehand, just like looking at the SDS prior to using it. Having an employee get training a week after they've hurt themselves doesn't help you. Evaluate and assess your program. You know, every once in a while, do what I call a survey by walking. Go walk your area, check in with your people, see what they're doing. We only use Napa penetrator here, and then there's 3 cans of WD-40 on a guy's toolbox. Where'd these come from? Oh, I brought them in with me because I like that better. Okay, we don't use this here. And if we're going to use it, we have to justify it, because now those cans that got brought into your work site don't have an SDS present, and you just got a violation. It's very easy for a simple thing that an employee does out of convenience to become your write-up, your violation. And it's a living program. You will revise this program regularly, where you're going to change your chemicals, you're going to change the amounts, you're going to change how you're doing things, because your program is going to change as time goes on. You know, the effective system, as they all interrelate, they all plug into each other. So knowing the standard, knowing who to assign the task to, who's going to be responsible, who's your go-to person, having that program established in writing allows you to make sure that you can teach it and you can enforce it the same for everybody. Ensure that all the containers are labeled. Maintain those safety data sheets. Inform and train the employees. And update your procedures periodically. All those things plugged in becomes a strong, effective hazardous communication program that not only keeps you from getting written up, it will save you money. It will increase your efficiency. Sources within the workplace. I talked about survey by walking. If you take a walk through your area once in a while, you'll be surprised what you're going to find. That employer, the supervisor, the coworkers, union reps, they will let you know when something's up. I think I mentioned it during the first 2 classes. Take a walk through Indeed and these other hiring agencies out there. You'll be surprised that they have company reviews, employees who left the company, vendors who've gone through your company, and what they say. Some of them are very, very dismal, and it's very easy to fix things. Like Liz was just saying, it comes down to respect. Respect is free. So if you have a break room, if you provide a break room for everybody, and they're bringing in dirty stuff and leaving it there, or they're smearing oil or other products across the refrigerator, it's no longer a break room. It's more of another part of the workplace. So it becomes everybody's effort as a unified effort to keep things clean. And if you have a culture to do things correctly and efficiently, that will cross level over to everything else. Your satellite sites, how you dispose of your products. If you don't do it organized and cleanly, it will come back and haunt you rather quickly. So having everybody understand this is the standard, this is what we do here, becomes very important. Having you walk around once in a while and see, is it truly happening, is important. If you see somebody circumnavigating the system, are they doing it because they don't have the stuff they need to do it correctly? And that's another thing you can pick up very easily just by walking through once in a while. Safety data sheets for the information on all chemicals have to be posted, but they're a great resource. Labels and warning signs, another great resource within the system to help you understand, is this really flammable? Because we're using it right next to the heater. That might be something to think about. Your employee orientation manuals, other training materials before your employees start working. Those are great ways to start the education, give them something to chew on so they know what they're looking for. And then every work task, every procedure should also have the warnings or a reference to the SDS for the products being used before they start the task. Outside the workplace, every vendor who gives you a product is required to provide you the SDS. Okay, so if you're having trouble finding an SDS, or you just don't have that person yet, whoever is buying the product needs to come back with an SDS for the product. It is incumbent on the vendor to provide that. The EPA will help you. Okay, they will give you help. Don't wait until you have a problem, because it's no longer help at that point. It becomes a violation. And then safety consultants. Like Liz said, we have a grant, we have funding where I can come to your workplace, take a look at what you got and where we need to go from here. Okay. All right. What do we cover? Why HazCom is important to you. We covered that. How the systems interrelate. We talked about the Right to Know program, the SDS program. 6 fairly simple steps to creating an effective program. How the effective system interrelates, how it can save you money, how it can save you time off, and the sources that are available.